Of a former Russian spy and his daughter with a deadly nerve agent. British authorities haven't determined where the poison came from. Here with more insight, Nile Gardiner with the Heritage Foundation. Now, there's so much we don't know. We were talking in the break. Could you tell us a bit? Do we even know what the nerve agent is and how it got there?
Well, this is, of course, still subject to a very broad investigation by the British police, so we don't know the exact description of the exact substance in this case, but there is intense speculation, of course, that this act of basically state terrorism has been carried out by the Russian government. They are the chief suspects in this. They have a long track record of eliminating political dissidents, former spies, and so on. And so, by all accounts, this is highly likely to be an act of murder carried out by the Russian state.
Sure. So far, of course, Russia completely denying any involvement. But why in the world would we believe them, just from a global standpoint?
Yeah. Well, there's absolutely no reason to believe the Russians whatsoever. And we are dealing with an absolutely murderous, brutal regime in Moscow led by Vladimir Putin. This is a regime that is carrying out acts of murder on British soil. There's also, of course, a police officer, a British police officer, who has been injured as a result of his exposure to this nerve agent. And without a doubt, I mean, this is a direct attack on Britain as well. This is not just an act against a specific former Russian spy. This is an act of violence against Great Britain as well.
Let's ask this. If indeed it's found out through this investigation, which, as you say, is very much ongoing, if it's found out that this was Russia, right, and certainly these are their actions, what then can be done by way of punishing them or holding them account for these horrific actions?
Yes, in fact, the British government is already discussing possible means of retaliation against the Russians. There's a wide range of options that Britain has, of course. You could see the expulsion of further Russian diplomats from London. You could see the strengthening of sanctions against Russia. You could see action taken against, for example, the large number of oligarchs who are living in the United Kingdom, many of them very close to Vladimir Putin. And so the Russians have a lot of money invested in Great Britain. So action could be taken directly against those who are close to Vladimir Putin. Also, I think that you are going to see potentially a bigger build-up of British military power in the Baltic states in order to head off the growing Russian threat in Eastern Europe. So the whole range of measures here, but we simply cannot let the Russians get away with this act of aggression here. The Russians must be held to account.
Because I would say from a global standpoint now, it does appear almost that Vladimir Putin and this entire regime has been getting away with it. From we know, at this point that they've meddled in our elections and others, this type of horrific thing here with the horrible substance that they're determining what it is. He seems to be going completely rogue. What is the control from a global standpoint of reining him and these actions in?
I think what we've seen in the UK in the last few days is a further confirmation that Vladimir Putin simply cannot be trusted. He is an adversary, a very deadly adversary, and the United States, Great Britain and NATO allies must stand up to the Russian threat. We cannot allow the Russians to carry out this kind of action, but also we must deter any kind of potential Russian threat against NATO territory in the Baltic states, against Poland and other American and British allies in Europe.
It looks like the action is escalating.
Yeah.
And
it certainly is, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think also that Vladimir Putin clearly sees Brexit Britain as a threat to Russia. And so the Russians are becoming more and more aggressive against Great Britain. Of course, Britain is leaving the European Union a year from now. And once Britain does leave the EU, it will be a very, very powerful adversary for the Russians in Europe. And certainly Vladimir Putin fears that.
Certainly. Well, we have to leave it there, but much more on that investigation as we find it out. Thank you, Nile.
Thank you very much.
Leland.
All right, live look from Moon Township, Western Pennsylvania. President Trump will rally voters